She was humiliated in front of everyone, pulled aside like a criminal, questioned as if her very presence was a threat, all because of the color of her skin. Security didn't ask politely. They demanded. Staff didn't verify facts. They assumed. Passengers stared but said nothing, their silence louder than any insult. She said she had a right to be there. They didn't believe her. She showed proof. They ignored it. She was told to wait, to move, to leave, while others who looked nothing like her walked through untouched. This wasn't just a mistake. It was targeted, calculated. And the ones who made her feel small were about to find out just how massive their mistake really was. You think you've seen airport drama? You haven't seen this. Stay until the end, because what happens next will flip everything upside down. Before we dive into this true tale of power, prejudice, and consequences, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if stories like this make you think, feel, or look at the world differently, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who still believes appearances tell the whole story. The terminal buzzed with polished efficiency, a sanctuary of glass and chrome built for the wealthy to move through the world untouched. Leora Winslow walked into that space with the quiet poise of someone who had long since learned how to carry herself through rooms not built for her. She wore confidence the way others wore designer scarves, subtle, unforced, and perfectly measured. Her coat, a deep charcoal blend that skimmed just below the knee, swayed slightly as she moved. The duffel bag across her shoulder bore no logo, but the stitching alone whispered quality. Her stride was deliberate, composed, the rhythm of her boots echoing across the marble floor in time with the ambient music that hummed from recessed ceiling panels. As she neared the cordoned-off entrance to the VIP wing, a man stepped into her path. Tall, squared at the shoulder, uniform starched to perfection, security. His nameplate read K. Griggs, and his voice was calm, clipped, and slightly too firm as he asked to see her ID and VIP credentials. She handed them over without hesitation. No surprise registered on her face. She'd been stopped before. She would be stopped again. He scanned the pass and identification slowly, eyes flicking up to her and then back to the screen, as if hoping the barcode would produce a different truth. 10 feet behind him, another guard leaned against a polished railing, phone tilted subtly upward. The soft shutter of a camera snapped as he captured a photo of Leora, then tapped out a message. Possible misplacement. Doesn't look like she belongs. Check it. He hit send. Griggs finally handed her credentials back, though his body remained a barrier. "We're doing an additional verification," he said. "Standard procedure." She gave a tight smile and stepped aside. No one else was stopped. No one else was asked. A white couple dressed in matching athleisure pulled rolling bags behind them and passed through unchallenged. An older man with a Rolex and a slight limp was greeted by name. Leora stood silently, not scrolling her phone, not pacing, just watching. She was used to waiting on a world that rarely waited for her. After nearly 5 minutes, Griggs nodded and stepped back. "You can go in." No apology, no acknowledgement of the delay, just permission. She passed through without a word, though her thoughts filed every second of the encounter away. Past the doors, the lounge opened up like a luxury magazine. Soft leather chairs, frosted glass dividers, curated playlists, and an unmistakable air of privilege. An attendant greeted her with a neutral smile and offered espresso, champagne, or still water. "Still, thank you." Leora moved toward the windowed edge of the lounge, choosing a seat angled toward the tarmac. As she sat and retrieved her tablet, the glass reflected her face, poised, unshaken. But in her mind, the moment replayed. Not because it hurt. She was past the sting. But because moments like that were patterns, and patterns needed to be tracked. She opened a memo titled Observation Log and added a new line. 8:42 a.m., O'Hara VIP Terminal. Flagged without cause. Staff, Kellen Griggs. Incident consistent with prior trends. Assessed security provider. She tapped save. 2 rows behind her, a man in a tailored jacket and aviator glasses adjusted his seat and glanced her way. She saw it in the corner of her eye, the flicker of surprise, the subtle double take. She didn't engage. She rarely did. She knew her presence, her posture, her silence, all unsettled people more than words ever could. She preferred it that way. Leora pulled up a file labeled Zurich Proposal and began reviewing line items. Her eyes moved across numbers and schedules, but her brain tracked something else: intent. It was never about policy. It was always about perception. Perception shaped response. And today, perception had told them she didn't belong. Not because of what she wore, not because of how she behaved, but because of who they assumed she was. They had scanned her face before they scanned her ID. The thought sat heavy, but not new. She returned to her numbers, to the logistics of what came next. Zurich would be the 5th expansion in 2 years. If the deal closed, it would cement her firm's footprint across the Atlantic. She wasn't a guest in this space. She was, by all measurable standards, a force within it. The attendant behind the desk was a young woman with glossy hair tied into a tight bun, her nameplate reading Meredith. Her posture straightened the moment Leora stepped forward, but not with the ease of trained hospitality, more like the tension of startled alert. Leora offered her pass and a gentle nod, already anticipating the protocol, but Meredith didn't scan it right away. Instead, she glanced at the screen, then back at Leora, then at the screen again. A flicker of hesitation crossed her face, quickly masked with a mechanical smile. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice sweetened by routine, "but it appears your access has not been activated for this location." Leora didn't flinch. She'd heard similar lines before, usually when a system glitch conveniently aligned with someone's assumptions. She calmly tapped her wristwatch and pulled up her confirmation email with the lounge invitation, holding it out for view. The details were clear: authorized entry, extended privileges, direct approval from the airline's Elite Services Division. Meredith took a shallow breath, leaned forward slightly, and whispered something under her breath to the male colleague standing beside her. He had been wiping the counter aimlessly, but now leaned in closer. They exchanged glances, then the man murmured back, not so low that it missed Leora's ears. "They always argue when things don't go their way. I bet she's one of those who complains online later." Leora's brow lifted ever so slightly, but her voice remained composed as she requested that they verify again, suggesting they refresh the system. Meredith nodded, tapping half-heartedly at the screen. After another delay, she stood. "Actually," she said, "you may be more comfortable in the general waiting area. It's just as nice and often quieter." Her tone had changed, less apologetic, more dismissive, like a gentle shove cloaked in courtesy. Leora tilted her head. "I'll wait here while it's sorted. I have the authorization, and I'd prefer not to move without clarity." Meredith's smile cracked slightly at the edges, faltering under the weight of insistence delivered without aggression. Still, she stepped to the side and picked up a phone, speaking in coded phrases. After several moments, she returned and said a supervisor would come shortly. Leora waited. The chairs behind her filled with other travelers, white-haired men in tailored suits, couples in matching resort wear, a teenager in Gucci sneakers fiddling with a phone. They were greeted with warmth, offered drinks, their passes scanned in seconds. No one else was asked to wait for verification. The discrepancy grew louder with each smooth check-in that followed. Leora's eyes tracked it all without reaction. Inside, she was recording the entire exchange with the kind of clarity that came not from anger, but repetition. This wasn't new. This was systemic choreography. After 6 minutes, a tall man in a dark vest and radio earpiece appeared. His badge read D, Tyler Guest Services Supervisor. He approached with a tired smile, the kind reserved for inconvenient moments requiring polite restraint. "Miss Winslow," he said, "I understand there's been a discrepancy. We're working on resolving it. But in the meantime, may I escort you to a courtesy suite down the concourse?" Leora exhaled slowly through her nose, sensing the pattern continuing to unfold. "That won't be necessary," she replied, lifting her chin slightly. "I've provided valid credentials. I'd like to enter the lounge I'm entitled to." The supervisor shifted, a flicker of something uncertain crossing his face, perhaps recognizing that this wasn't someone who could be nudged quietly out of frame. Still, he didn't relent. "We've had some access issues with the system. To avoid delay or discomfort, we'd like to offer you a temporary space while we sort it internally. It'll just be a few moments." Leora nodded once, her decision made not from agreement, but calculation. "Very well," she said. "Lead the way." She followed him past the crowd and out of sight, but not without noting the triumphant glance exchanged between Meredith and her colleague, who had now turned their attention to the next passenger, a man with a wrinkled blazer and a sour expression who barely looked up as he was scanned in without delay. The temporary suite turned out to be a basic conference room repurposed for overflow. A carafe of lukewarm coffee sat on a corner table, and the furniture lacked the quiet prestige of the main lounge. Leora sat calmly at the edge of the sofa, pulled out her tablet again, and opened a new document. She began to type with precision, her keystrokes steady, deliberate. Memo: Incident Terminal 5, Elite Access denied. Staff involved: M. Reynolds, attendant; D. Tyler, supervisor. Observations: Selective enforcement of verification procedures. 10 minutes passed, then 15. When the door opened, it did not reveal the return of Meredith or Tyler, nor anyone bearing the professionalism of a hospitality manager. Instead, a broader figure appeared mid-50s, in an ill-fitted blazer with a badge clipped at a sharp angle. Vaughn Ellerby. His presence filled the room before he spoke. There was something about the way he walked in, shoulders squared, chest inflated, that signaled authority unused to being questioned. He didn't offer a greeting. His eyes moved immediately to Leora, scanning her face not for recognition, but confirmation. He cleared his throat, not as a gesture of politeness, but like someone preparing to lecture. "Miss Winslow, I've been informed there's some confusion regarding your access." Leora closed her tablet carefully and looked up, her expression measured. "There is no confusion," she said. "I've presented valid credentials and an active reservation. What's unclear is why I've been delayed." Vaughn's jaw tensed. "We understand there may be a technical issue regarding your tier verification, and to maintain order within our elite spaces, we are exercising discretion in how we allocate temporary seating." Leora raised an eyebrow. "And does that discretion involve rerouting only select passengers who don't match your expectations?" Vaughn's composure cracked briefly, then snapped back into place with a steely edge. "This isn't personal, Miss Winslow, but we have to think about how things appear to other guests. Appearances matter." The phrase landed with an almost clinical chill. Appearances matter, as if to say her presence alone could be disruptive. Leora's spine straightened. "What you mean is that I make your regulars uncomfortable." Vaughn didn't reply. He gestured toward the hallway instead. "We ask for your cooperation. There is a hospitality station available outside Gate 42 that may better suit your situation." Leora stood slowly, her movements deliberate, her silence heavier than any rebuttal. But before she could speak, another voice entered the room. A man in his late 30s, seated at a corner desk with a laptop and carry-on bag, stood abruptly. His face bore an expression of stunned disbelief. "Excuse me, are you serious? She's being moved because of how she looks?" His tone was indignant, his eyes flicking between Leora and Vaughn. Vaughn turned sharply. "Sir, this matter doesn't concern you. I'm asking you to continue with your travel plans and avoid interfering." The man didn't back down. "I watched her walk in here. She did nothing wrong. I've been flying this airline for 15 years, and if this is how you treat people, I have a serious problem." Vaughn's smile disappeared completely. He stepped forward, his voice dropping an octave. "I suggest you refrain from escalating this, unless you would prefer we verify your identity as well." The room fell into tense silence. The man blinked, taken aback. He hesitated, then looked at Leora, his frustration turning to apology. Vaughn turned back to her. "Let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be." For a long second, Leora said nothing. She considered her options, not from fear, but strategy. Then she nodded once, collected her tablet and bag, and stepped toward the door. As she passed Vaughn, she spoke evenly. "Everything you've done here today has been noted." His mouth tightened, but he said nothing. Outside the temporary suite, the hallway buzzed with the efficient hum of travelers passing by, oblivious to the quiet conflict unfolding just beyond the polished glass. Leora walked toward the concourse, not toward Gate 42 as instructed, but to the nearest private lounge reserved for corporate affiliates. She passed the front desk without pause, scanned her pass again, and this time, the green light blinked immediately. No resistance, no challenge. The door opened without incident, and she stepped into a new quiet. But her thoughts didn't settle. She opened her tablet again and began to type. She needed to see how far the threads unraveled. She watched as another woman entered the nearby SkyFirst access line, her pass scanned without hesitation, her luggage waved through with casual disinterest. Leora had that same access, same class, same clearance, only she hadn't passed through as easily. As she turned to leave, a voice called out behind her. It was flat, rehearsed, with that brittle edge of pretend protocol. "Ma'am, may I speak with you for a moment?" She stopped, turning calmly to face the speaker. A young man in a security uniform different from Griggs, but carrying the same hollow professionalism, gestured toward her bag. "Standard compliance procedure," he said. "Random screening." She raised an eyebrow, but said nothing, already aware this wasn't random. It never was. He motioned toward a bench flanked by velvet ropes. She was asked to step aside, not into a private room, not behind screen, but right there, in full view of the concourse. Her shoulders remained square as she complied, placing her bag on the bench. He asked her to unzip it, slowly, carefully. Under his gaze and the growing attention of the passers-by, she did. The scent of leather, of tightly packed folders and scented hand cream, wafted into the open air as he sifted through her belongings without gloves, without care. A small crowd began to form, not intentionally, not rudely, but in that soft, automatic way people slow their pace when they sense something out of rhythm. She saw a mother tug her child closer, a teenager stop mid-step, a businessman frown and look away. No one spoke. They didn't have to. Leora remained composed, eyes steady, as her laptop case was opened, her toiletries examined, her tablet flipped carelessly and set aside. No explanation was given, no suspicion named. Just procedure. That was the word they all used when they didn't want to admit intent. When he finished, he nodded briskly and zipped the bag with a grunt of satisfaction. "You're good to go." Leora didn't respond. She simply took her belongings, restored everything to its precise order, and moved away from the circle of silent eyes that had watched her dignity be questioned like it was baggage. 10 steps later, she paused at a directional sign pointing toward the VIP lounge restrooms. Needing a moment to regroup, she made her way toward the door, shoulders still high despite the sting in her chest. As she reached the entrance, another uniformed employee blocked her path, clipboard in hand. "Restroom access is for current lounge occupants only," he said, scanning her pass and shaking his head. "Your profile doesn't show active access. You may use the public facilities near Gate 17. Leora held his gaze, the edges of her patience worn thin by repetition. She explained she had been relocated without cause and that her boarding class permitted access. But he was already pointing. "Ma'am, it's just down the hall. This one's reserved for those with current approval." The emphasis on those was soft but unmistakable. She turned without a word, her heels tapping with less rhythm now, more resolve. The hall to Gate 17 curved past crowded eateries and loud families, far from the curated silence of SkyFirst amenities. The restroom there smelled of bleach and tire tiles, the kind of place meant for foot traffic, not elegance. She washed her hands slowly, studying herself in the mirror. Her face gave away nothing, but her chest ached with the familiar, exhausting tightness that came not from shame, but from restraint. She returned to the terminal with a new entry already forming in her mind. Memo: public inspection conducted without probable cause. Location: Terminal 3 Main Hall. Time: 9:28 a.m. Observers: minimum 20. Result: no findings, no apology. Secondary exclusion: restroom access denied due to manipulated access status. She wrote it all down. She documented not because she needed to remember, she never forgot, but because paper could prove what people refused to believe. Data didn't blink. Her phone buzzed with a reminder. Zur call in 2 hours. Enough time to board. Enough time to act. She reached the departure screen and confirmed her gate. Concourse B, Jetway 6. As she made her way there, she passed another check-in station, another line of travelers, another moment where the system could decide what version of her it wanted to recognize. But this time, she wasn't the one being judged. She was the one watching. She found an empty seat near the boarding lane and settled in, tablet resting on her lap, screen dark, mind scanning the scene more than any device ever could. Around her, passengers trickled in, some oblivious, others sharp-eyed. A man approached the priority lane, tall, mid-50s, salt and pepper hair, designer briefcase in hand and a monogrammed overcoat folded neatly on his arm. He moved with the entitled grace of someone who had never been made to explain himself. The gate attendant greeted him with a wide smile. No scan, no questions. Just a nod and the phrase, "Welcome back, Mr. Halston." Leora watched him walk through the roped entrance and turn toward the jet bridge. Then he stopped. His eyes met hers as if pulled by instinct. Something flickered behind his gaze, recognition or curiosity or something else entirely. He walked back 2 paces, angled toward her seat, and gave a small, polite chuckle. "Didn't expect to see someone like you sitting here," he said, his tone casual but laced with undertone. Leora said nothing at first. Then she raised an eyebrow, her silence deliberate. He smiled wider, mistaking it for confusion. "Don't get me wrong," he continued, "I'm all for progress. But some spaces, well, they're earned. It's not about exclusion, it's about standards." The words weren't loud, but they struck like a slap in the hush of the waiting area. A woman nearby looked up from her magazine. A young man 2 seats away glanced between them. No one intervened. Leora's voice was low when she answered. "Standards are only measured fairly when everyone starts at the same line." He smiled again, but tighter now. "Just be careful," he said, offering a nod toward the boarding lane. "People are watching. Reactions can define perception." Then he turned and walked down the jet bridge, vanishing into the fuselage like a ghost with a pension. Leora's pulse remained steady. Her mind, however, sparked like a wire under pressure. She stood and walked to the counter, calm and composed. The shift supervisor stood behind the desk, mid-30s, clean-shaven, navy uniform pressed sharp. She presented her boarding pass and requested clarification on the boarding procedure, particularly regarding consistency. The supervisor glanced at her pass, then at her face, then back to the screen. His answer came without hesitation. "You're cleared, of course, but we try to keep the priority lane moving with as little friction as possible. Some passengers," he paused, "expect a certain flow." Leora's eyes narrowed slightly. "So protocol is flexible depending on who's watching." The supervisor raised his hands slightly in mock defense. "Ma'am, I'm not here to make this a conflict. We just want everyone to feel comfortable." Strong reactions, he added, tend to make people uncomfortable. Sometimes it's best to just let things roll off. Leora considered his words. Let things roll off. As if injustice were rain on glass. As if disrespect was only real when voiced too loudly. She leaned slightly forward and spoke with surgical precision. "Being calm doesn't mean I didn't notice. Being silent doesn't mean I didn't file it away." The supervisor blinked, unsure how to respond. She thanked him curtly, turned, and returned to her seat, the weight of his message clear. Stay polite, stay small, or be labeled disruptive. The minutes ticked by until the boarding call began. Families, groups, and business travelers queued with programmed efficiency. When her group was called, Leora stepped forward, boarding pass in hand. As she passed through the gate, another staffer smiled and offered a quick glance at her pass. "Enjoy your flight, Miss Winslow." The voice was neutral, the words automated. But she caught the faintest hesitation in the woman's eyes before the smile returned. Inside the jet bridge, Leora walked steadily toward the aircraft, each step a quiet act of defiance. Every interaction behind her now lived in memory and record. Her seat, 2A, was already turned down with a blanket folded, water poured, pillow fluffed. She placed her bag in the compartment, sat, and buckled in. Outside the window, the runway stretched into fog. But inside, clarity had never been sharper. She tapped on her tablet and opened a new log entry. Subject: Halston Richard. Remarks made regarding place and progress. Supervisor: Gate 16, name tag Chandler. Noted language: friction reduction, strong reactions. Implied: suppression of justified complaint. Tone: pacifying. Impact: escalation masked as diplomacy. She saved the note and pulled up her Zurich brief, but not to review it. This time, she wasn't merely tolerating. She was archiving, calculating, preparing a mechanism larger than their understanding. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, breathing slowly, steadying herself as the minutes dragged. Then came the moment that changed the tempo of everything. A quiet knock against the bulkhead wall beside her seat was followed by the arrival of a uniformed airline official accompanied by 2 private security officers. They didn't announce their presence loudly, nor did they make a scene at first. But the tone was unmistakable. The man stepped forward, a clipboard in hand, an apologetic expression fixed to his face that held no genuine remorse. "Miss Winslow," he began, "we're going to need you to deplane for a moment. There's been a flag on your boarding status. It'll only take a few minutes to clear up." She opened her eyes fully, meeting his gaze with a focus that silenced any pretense. "What flag?" she asked, her tone unwavering. "I was cleared through multiple verifications. Everything was approved." He glanced at his clipboard again, avoiding direct eye contact. "There seems to be a discrepancy tied to an internal audit. It's protocol, I assure you." Security flanked either side of her, not aggressively, not threatening, but present in that way that made absence of resistance seem like complicity. Leora knew this tactic. Make the target feel watched, then make the audience feel justified in watching. Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt, gathered her tablet and coat, and rose with the deliberate grace of someone who would never let them have the satisfaction of seeing her shaken. The flight attendant who had served water earlier averted her eyes. Other passengers turned toward the aisle, some subtly, others with open curiosity. A few had their phones raised, not yet recording, just preparing, just in case. She was escorted back down the jet bridge and through the boarding gate into the terminal, where a dense hush fell across the area as people registered what was happening. Passengers seated near the gate stood slowly or leaned sideways to get a better view. A man in a polo shirt whispered something to his wife. She tilted her head toward Leora and said, not even whispering. Maybe she thought this was a fashion show. Someone else chuckled. Another pulled out their phone and snapped a photo, not bothering to hide the shutter sound. Leora kept her shoulders high, her gaze forward, refusing to give them the spectacle they expected. The security officers said nothing as they led her toward a glass-paneled holding room near the far side of the concourse. Inside were 2 chairs, a desk, and a wall-mounted monitor with the airline logo glowing in soft blue. The door closed behind them. The silence that followed was not respectful, it was loaded. She sat when prompted, though no explanation was offered. A woman in a slate gray blazer entered after 3 minutes, a corporate liaison with a calm smile and tense posture. "Miss Winslow, thank you for your patience. We're trying to sort through a minor system issue that's causing some ID mismatches on certain high-security profiles." Leora blinked slowly. "I wasn't flagged before. I passed through multiple verified systems. What changed?" The woman hesitated. "It may have been a retroactive compliance adjustment. It's all automated, you understand. Nothing intentional. We just want to ensure clarity." Leora tilted her head slightly. "Let me guess. The automation only seems to target people like me." The liaison opened her mouth, closed it again, then forced a neutral nod. "I'll escalate to our senior operations team. Please wait here a little longer while we complete our review." She left the room. Leora leaned back in her chair, inhaling deeply, slowly. Her fingers hovered over her tablet for a moment, then began typing. Incident update. Terminal detainment under fabricated pretext. Security presence, 2 officers. Staff present, no legal cause presented. No passenger misconduct. Hostile environment, public embarrassment. Cultural targeting confirmed. Action. Prepare legal summary. Additional item. Flag evidence of procedural inconsistency. Outside the glass, more travelers slowed to stare. One airport staffer in a service vest passed by the door, muttered to his colleague, and laughed. Maybe she thought this was a luxury expo. Should have gone to the mall instead. His laughter was joined by a low snort from the colleague beside him. Leora heard it. She heard all of it, but she didn't look at them. She remained perfectly composed, her breathing slow, her hands still. When the door opened again 20 minutes later, it was the same liaison, flanked now by a more senior-looking manager in a tailored blazer with a gold name badge. He approached quickly, speaking in hushed tones. "Miss Winslow, we deeply apologize for the inconvenience. There was, in fact, no valid reason for your removal. Your boarding has been reinstated and we'll be upgrading your service to extended first as compensation. We hope you'll accept our sincerest regrets." No apology, even though one had been weakly offered. She opened her tablet, but her fingers hovered above the screen, unmoving. What she felt was not rage, it was clarity. Cold, sharp, surgical. Her mind had stepped beyond recording and into execution. She had gathered enough. The incident was no longer anecdotal. It was actionable. She glanced down at the time. Zurich was still on the schedule, but it no longer held the same urgency. Not because the deal was unimportant, but because something greater was now in motion. The plane sat idle. A mechanical delay had paused takeoff. The cabin lights remained dim, passengers restless, attendants navigating growing tension. Leora stood. She walked past the crew, past the galley, past the looks. Her steps carried weight, without sound. Reaching the entrance of the cabin, she paused, speaking quietly to the nearest staff member. "I need to disembark. It will be brief. I won't need clearance." The attendant blinked, unsure how to process the confidence in her voice, but before reply could form, another voice entered the space. It came from the corridor, just outside the jet bridge, sharp and urgent. A man in a dark business suit, tie loosened, phone still pressed to his ear, stepped into view and froze the moment his eyes landed on her. "Leora." His voice held no doubt, only recognition and confusion. "Why are you out here? What happened?" She didn't smile. She didn't explain. She nodded once in acknowledgement and reached for her phone. She dialed without hesitation, her tone calm and precise as the call connected. "This is Winslow. Cancel the Zurich fund. Remove Terminal 4 from the investment roster. Effective immediately. Flag it as non-compliant." She ended the call. One tap, one breath. Then she turned back toward the aircraft. The man stared at her, his mouth slightly open, a question forming but never leaving his lips. He knew who she was, just not why she was here. The question of what had been done to her was already being replaced by a more dangerous realization. What she was now about to do. She stepped back onto the jet bridge with a composure that eclipsed everything that had come before. Every insult, every slight, every barrier had brought her here. To this moment, where knowledge of her name was no longer theoretical, where power no longer whispered but announced itself. Inside the aircraft, a murmur began to build as passengers caught fragments of what had just occurred. Someone whispered her last name. Another passenger typed quickly on their phone, trying to confirm a rumor. The businessman across the aisle from her tapped his colleague. "That's Leora Winslow." The Leora Winslow. The woman behind Winslow Infrastructure. The chair of the Zurich Civic Initiative. The majority investor in this terminal's recent renovation. The mind behind the $500 million development fund that made this airport a crown jewel of international travel. A wave of unease swept across the first-class cabin. Those who had stared now looked down. Those who had whispered now froze. Von Ellerby's name rose quietly in someone's voice, followed by another name, Kellen Griggs. the names now linked with an incident that was no longer invisible. Leora didn't speak. She sat down again, this time with purpose. The silence in the aircraft had changed. It was no longer expectant. It was charged. Something had shifted, and it could not be undone. Back in the operations wing, phones were already ringing. A call had been received at corporate. A second call had reached the Legal Affairs Division. An assistant's voice trembled as she confirmed that the board of Winslow Infrastructure had retracted its aviation investment contract with immediate effect. The funding for Terminal 4 was suspended. Without that funding, expansion efforts stalled. Contracts would be renegotiated, public scrutiny would rise, and accountability would be demanded. Outside, the terminal behind her stood still in the slow crawl of airport motion, passengers boarding, announcements echoing, gates opening and closing in orchestrated precision. But something underneath all of that began to crack. In the command room 2 floors above Gate B6, a team of media officers and operations staff gathered around a screen. The email that had just arrived bore a header they all recognized, but never expected to see used like this. It was a formal withdrawal notice from Winslow Infrastructure Holdings, signed directly by Leora C. Winslow, Chairwoman and Chief Executive Officer. The message was brief, but its content struck like thunder. Effective immediately, all active capital projects, lease partnerships, and infrastructure contracts linked to the regional terminal and its partner entities would be paused, pending investigation of discriminatory practices and operational breaches. Within 5 minutes, the press liaison contacted the Public Affairs Office. Within 10, the boardroom screens lit up with a meeting invitation marked critical. At minute 12, the airport's media monitor, mounted above the central terminal corridor and visible from 5 different gates, shifted from advertisements to a breaking statement. The screen faded to black, then came alive with a company seal in deep navy, flanked by silver serif lettering. A voiceover began, calm and professional. Winslow Infrastructure Holdings announces the immediate suspension of all strategic investments at Westbridge International due to violations of policy and principle, including discrimination and unjust treatment of protected patrons. Then came the image. A high-resolution headshot of Leora, not posed in glamour, but in purpose. Behind her, the company's signature teal and stone backdrop glowed. Her name appeared beside her title: Chief Executive Officer, Founder, Lead Benefactor of the Westbridge Expansion Project. In the lounge, near the location where she'd first been denied entry hours earlier, the image was unmistakable. The attendants froze. Meredith, who had laughed with her colleague, stared at the screen with a face drained of color. Passengers turned toward the display like moths to fire. The realization hit in waves, first confusion, then disbelief, then embarrassment. The woman they had questioned, delayed, monitored, dismissed. She had funded the building they stood in. She had designed its lines, poured capital into its foundation, and held the contracts that signed their salaries. The business traveler who had mocked her earlier now shifted uncomfortably in his seat, pulling his collar as if the screen itself could see him. A woman who had once snapped a photo of her whispered, "Is that her?" The same woman they walked past like she didn't belong? In the gate offices, supervisors fumbled with earpieces. Gate Chandler, who had advised her to keep her reaction small, now watched his own name surface in an HR incident alert. Vaughn Ellerby's record was already being pulled. Kellen Griggs' body cam was requested by legal. Every name she had documented was now highlighted in an active audit file marked Priority 1. Down on the tarmac, the flight she had originally boarded had not yet taken off. Air traffic control had issued a temporary delay due to internal coordination. Inside the plane, the pilot stood at the front of the cabin after receiving a direct call. He looked toward Leora, who still sat with the same composed stillness, her eyes forward, her body unmoved. No words were spoken, but a look passed between them. Respect, not pity, not regret, recognition. Behind her, the same passengers who had once looked past her now avoided her gaze completely. The silence in the cabin was louder than any announcement. Across the terminal, airport staff began whispering. Some shook their heads. Some blinked in disbelief. A few, aware of how their behavior had contributed to this moment, silently excused themselves from their posts and disappeared down side hallways. In the central plaza, a digital ticker began cycling headlines. Billionaire CEO pulls $1 billion project over airport scandal. Westbridge faces financial freefall after discrimination allegation. Winslow Infrastructure demands full accountability. One news camera, stationed for a travel segment, caught the screen just as Leora's name and title looped for the third time. The footage would be online within the hour. As the wheels of the plane finally lifted off the ground, Leora leaned back in her seat and exhaled once. A sharp chain of notifications appeared across internal devices. Suspension orders, code red accountability flags, and emergency compliance memos. At exactly 3:17 p.m., 3 uniformed staff members entered the security hub where Kellen Griggs had been stationed all morning. His back was to them as he reviewed idle footage, unaware that the red light above the door meant a recorded intervention was underway. When he turned, the look on his face twisted between denial and confusion, then fell into grim recognition. The senior officer stepped forward, issued a single directive. "You're relieved of duty pending investigation," and nodded toward the hallway. Kellen opened his mouth to speak, but the words didn't come. His badge was removed. His ID keycard clipped. His radio handed off to another guard. As he was escorted through the corridor toward the terminal exit, passengers turned, whispered, and recorded. The same corridor where he had quietly blocked Leora now became the stage of his own quiet expulsion. Within 20 minutes, the same scene repeated at the guest services desk where Meredith and her supervisor Tyler had once smirked behind polite smiles and bureaucratic language. They stood stiff as 2 HR officials arrived with an observer and a handheld scanner. Meredith's mouth opened as if to argue, but a single shake of the head ended it. Tyler didn't resist. His expression said he'd already read the headlines. As they were guided through the lounge, the irony wasn't lost on the same guests they had once served. A woman in a Chanel jacket whispered to her husband, "That's them, the ones from the video." Her husband nodded, phone in hand, already uploading the footage to social media. At the gate, Chandler, who had advised Leora to stay calm to avoid discomfort, was being escorted away by 2 internal affairs agents. His eyes were down, his gait heavy. Behind him, a junior staffer whispered to a colleague, "I told him we'd catch up." Every name that Leora had logged, every behavior that had once been brushed aside, now lived in formal reports stamped urgent, with forwarding chains that led directly to the CEO's office of the Westbridge Airport Authority. Vaughn Ellerby was the last to fall. At 4:06 p.m., he was called into a private conference room with 3 executives and a representative from the airline's external legal counsel. The door was closed, but the meeting lasted less than 10 minutes. When he emerged, his badge was gone, and his face was pale. Unlike the others, he was not escorted by security. He walked himself out, shoulders sunken, the echo of every arrogant word he'd spoken now ringing back louder in memory than they ever had allowed. Cameras caught him exiting through the arrivals hallway. Press had already gathered after confirmation that the investor fallout had reached 8 figures. A reporter called out, "Was the discrimination intentional?" Vaughn didn't answer. Another voice, "Did you know who she was? Did you say appearances matter?" He kept walking. He didn't look up. A photo of him walking past the terminal's giant welcome banner, funded by Winslow Infrastructure, would appear on the front page of 2 national outlets by evening. Meanwhile, the stock price of Skylink Management Group, the parent company of the airport's operations wing, had begun its freefall. Investors who had celebrated its quarterly rise just days earlier were now offloading positions in panic. Trading volume tripled in under an hour. Screens inside the terminal flashed a headline, "Winslow pullback triggers Skylink decline." Analysts warned that the sudden divestment could spark a chain reaction across infrastructure portfolios in 4 states. On the 21st floor of a financial building across the city, the Skylink boardroom was in crisis mode. The chairperson demanded a forensic audit of every executive's activity tied to the Westbridge expansion. The General Counsel requested full access to employee conduct logs and internal complaint records. A whistleblower hotline was activated, and within the first hour, 6 anonymous reports were filed. Each referenced the same patterns: selective screening, passive-aggressive dismissal, targeted random checks, all aimed disproportionately at passengers of color. One report included a photo of Leora, taken hours before the scandal broke, paired with a screenshot of a staffer's private group chat mocking her presence in the lounge. It was enough to trigger a Title VI review. Meanwhile, in the Zurich boardroom that had awaited Leora's appearance, her absence was explained not with apology, but with purpose. Her second-in-command entered the meeting precisely on time and delivered a statement. Miss Winslow will not be joining us today. She is addressing a matter of principle. As you may have seen, her decision to withdraw from a project was made in response to institutional misconduct. It reflects her values, not just her leadership. The European partners, though startled, nodded in silent agreement. Months passed, but the ripple of what had happened at Westbridge never really stopped. The immediate storm had subsided. The headlines faded from top scrolls to archived reports, and the media gradually turned its gaze to other scandals, other battles for justice. But in the wake of Leora Winslow's quiet reckoning, the landscape had irrevocably shifted. The incident became a mandatory case study in aviation ethics and corporate diversity training nationwide. Internal policies at Skylink Management Group were rewritten from the foundation up. A new executive was appointed to oversee operations compliance, and a committee of independent civil rights observers was embedded into infrastructure oversight across multiple U.S. hubs. But that was only the institutional level. Beneath that, within the very people who had once carried out the exclusions, something else began to take shape, a slower, more personal kind of reckoning. It came not by force, but by reflection. It began, perhaps unexpectedly, with Von Ellerby. Months after his resignation, he reappeared, not on a stage or in a courtroom, but seated across from a journalist in a stripped-down public interview, the backdrop modest, the lighting natural. His posture was smaller, his eyes sunken from time and thought. The interviewer didn't press. They simply asked, "Why did it happen?" Vaughn inhaled, his voice low and without rehearsal. "I didn't think I was the problem. I thought I was upholding a standard, but I see now I was guarding something broken." He went on to recount not only the day's events, but the years of silent reinforcement that had made his decisions feel reasonable. "I wasn't just protecting space, I was protecting a belief that people had to fit a mold to deserve it. And she didn't. And that frightened me." The clip went viral not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. For the first time, someone had said the quiet part out loud and took responsibility not out of fear, but shame. Leora did not respond publicly. She did not need to. Accountability was no longer her burden to demand. Elsewhere, Meredith left aviation entirely. She joined a nonprofit focused on workplace equity and quietly submitted a signed affidavit that became part of the internal restructuring records. It wasn't an act of redemption, not at first, but of discomfort that grew too heavy to ignore. Tyler moved to another city, took a lower-ranking position, and was last seen attending a community-led seminar on unconscious bias, not as a guest speaker, but as a participant seated quietly in the back row. The story might have ended there, with policy changed and reputations altered, but it didn't. 1 year later, in a small community hall just outside Chicago, a youth mentoring summit was underway. The keynote panel included local leaders, a judge, a businesswoman, and at the end of the table, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a security uniform with no rank, just a name tag that read Kellen. He was introduced as a speaker on perspective. The audience stirred. Some recognized him. Most didn't. But when he spoke, the room quieted. "I used to think it was my job to guard boundaries. Now I know I was helping build walls." He looked across the audience, then toward the woman seated beside him. Leora, dressed in a navy dress with rolled sleeves and no title on display. She simply nodded once, allowing the moment to belong to him. She didn't need the spotlight. She had already used it. Kellen continued. The woman I stopped that day, she didn't raise her voice. She didn't fight me, but she made me see what I didn't want to, that I wasn't protecting safety. I was enforcing comfort for people like me at the cost of people like her. That changed me. And if I can be changed, so can the system. The applause wasn't loud, but it was deep, carried by something more enduring than claps: understanding. Later, the clip surfaced online, not trending like the earlier scandal, but shared in smaller circles, where it mattered more. In one corner of the frame, Leora could be seen speaking with a group of students afterward, one of whom later posted a photo captioned, "I met someone today who didn't change the world with anger, but with boundaries, and made those boundaries visible to everyone else." Meanwhile, Winslow infrastructure continued to grow. New contracts formed under stricter ethics guidelines. Airports that had once rejected oversight now requested consultation. The Zurich initiative, once paused, resumed under a new name: the Open Gate Project. Its mission was clear: access without assumption. Every blueprint bore a quiet symbol in the corner, a minimalist W, encased in a circle. No slogan, just presence. Back in her office overlooking Lake Michigan, Leora stood by the window, the late afternoon light casting a soft halo across her shoulders. Her assistant entered with a report. "There's another request from the airport in Atlanta. They want a partner under the new equity model." Leora nodded. "Let's send them the framework. If they're ready, we move forward. And if not, we walk." She smiled slightly, not with triumph, but resolve. Because change had come, not through revenge, but revelation. And through that revelation, justice had not only corrected the past, but cleared the runway for a better future. The end. If this story moved you or made you think differently about justice and redemption, consider subscribing for more powerful narratives like this one. What part of the story stood out to you the most? Was it the moment of public accountability or the quiet transformation that followed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We'd love to hear your perspective.